My son-in-law stood up from his chair, looked straight at me and said, "You know what, old man? You've been a guest at this table long enough." Then he picked up the bowl of leftover chili, the one my daughter had cooked that morning, the one I'd brought the ground beef for, and he poured it over my head. I didn't move. I didn't say a word. I sat there for a moment, feeling the warmth of it running down the back of my neck into my collar. My daughter was sitting 3 feet away. She looked at me, then looked away. I stood up. I took the napkin off my lap, folded it once and set it on the table. Then I walked to the front door, picked up my jacket and left. But before I got to my car, I made one phone call. My name is Douglas. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years building a regional freight and logistics company out of nothing. A single truck, a rented warehouse in Akron, Ohio, and a contract with a mid-sized auto parts manufacturer that could have dropped me any quarter. I didn't drop them. They didn't drop me. By 2019, I had 47 employees, a fleet of 22 trucks, and contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies. I'm telling you this not to impress you. I'm telling you this because what comes next only makes sense if you understand what I was willing to sacrifice to give my daughter a life I never had. Her name is Megan. She was born when I was 34, 2 years after her mother, Sandra, and I got married. Sandra was a good woman, organized, practical, the kind of person who made lists before making lists. We were a good team for a long time. When Megan was 11, Sandra was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. She fought it for 4 years. She died in the spring, right around the time the azaleas in our backyard started blooming. After that, it was just the two of us. I won't pretend I handled it perfectly. A man running a growing business and raising a teenage girl alone. There were things that slipped. I worked too many Saturdays. I missed a school play once because a truck broke down on I-77. I hired a woman named Patricia, who'd been my office manager for years, to pick Megan up on days I couldn't make it. Patricia did it without complaint. She even went to the parent-teacher conferences when I had to be in Columbus. But I was there. Not always there. Not always at the right moment, but I was there, and I gave Megan everything I could give her. Not just money, but attention, intention. Every vacation I took was with her. Every bonus I earned went towards something for her future. When she got into Ohio State, I was so proud I cried in the parking lot of a Wendy's because I didn't want her to see me. She majored in communications, did well enough, made friends easily, the way she always had. In her junior year, she met a man named Brett through a mutual friend at a tailgate. I met Brett for the first time at Thanksgiving. He was 37 years older than Megan, and he sold commercial real estate in Columbus. He had the handshake of someone who'd practiced it, the kind that starts firm and loosens just before it ends, like he was deciding in real time how much to trust you. He called me Sir that first night. He complimented Sandra's old stuffing recipe that I'd made myself. He asked about the business with what seemed like genuine curiosity. I liked him well enough. I told myself I was being cautious because I was her father, and that's what fathers do. They got married 18 months later at a venue outside of Columbus. Beautiful day. I paid for the wedding, which came to just over $40,000. I didn't mention it, not once. That wasn't a loan. That was a gift. That's what you do. I also set them up in their first home, not purchased it outright. I'm not someone who believes in doing everything for your children, never have been, but I gave them $60,000 as a down payment so they weren't starting underwater. The house was in a nice neighborhood in Westerville, good schools, quiet streets, the kind of place Sandra would have loved. For the first year, things seemed fine. Megan and I talked on the phone twice a week, had dinner together once or twice a month. Brett was often working, or said he was. He'd show up to dinners late, phone in hand, always something urgent. I chalked it up to the nature of his business. Then the calls started shifting. Megan began calling to tell me things, complaints mostly. The house needed a new HVAC system. Brett's car was in the shop. They'd found water damage in the basement. Each time, there was a pause after she finished describing the problem. A particular kind of pause. The kind where the other person is waiting to see if you'll offer. I offered. Of course I did. The HVAC system, $8,000. The car, I covered the deductible. The basement, I hired a contractor I knew personally to do the work at cost. I didn't keep a running total. Maybe I should have. Around their second anniversary, I started noticing something different in the way Megan spoke to me. Small things at first. A sharpness at the edges of sentences that hadn't been there before. She'd ask me for something, and when I asked a follow-up question, a normal question, just trying to understand, she'd sigh like I was the one wasting her time. Once I mentioned that I was thinking about eventually selling the company and retiring somewhere quieter, maybe North Carolina or somewhere with a little more green. She said, without looking up from her phone, "You should probably figure out your finances before you make any big moves, Dad." I was 61 years old. I had a profitable business, a paid-off house, and a retirement account that would have made most people's eyes water. I didn't say that. I just nodded and changed the subject. Brett, for his part, had started to drop the "sir." He called me Doug now, which was fine, but the way he said it changed. It started to carry something extra, a casualness that tipped occasionally into dismissiveness. He'd speak over me at dinner. He'd correct me in front of Megan on things he didn't actually know more about than I did. Once, when I mentioned something about a shipping contract I was renegotiating, he said, "I mean, that's a different world from what I deal with, but sure." He smiled when he said it. I let it go. I kept letting it go. The dinner happened on a Thursday in March. Megan had invited me over, said she wanted to cook. I brought wine and ground beef because I knew she was making chili. She'd mentioned it on the phone. I got there at 6. Brett got there at 6:40, loosening his tie in the doorway, not apologizing for being late. Dinner was fine until it wasn't. I was talking about something. I honestly don't even remember what it was. Something small, something ordinary. And Brett put his fork down and said, "Can I be honest with you, Doug?" I said, "Sure." He said, "I think you insert yourself into our lives a lot more than you realize. And I think Megan is too polite to say it, but we've talked about it." I looked at my daughter. She didn't look back at me. I said, "I didn't know you felt that way." He said, "Look, you've been generous, I'll give you that. But generosity doesn't buy you a seat at every table, you know what I mean." I set down my fork. I asked Megan if this was how she felt too. She said, "Brett just means we're trying to build our own thing, Dad." I sat with that for a moment. Then I said I understood, and I meant it. At least part of me did. Children need to build their own thing. That's true, but something in the way he'd said it, the performance of it, the way he'd waited until I was sitting down with a bowl of food in front of me to tell me I wasn't welcome, that part I couldn't quite locate a place for. I said I should probably get going then. That's when Brett stood up and picked up the bowl of leftover chili from the center of the table. He looked at me. He said, "Yeah, you probably should." And he tipped it over my head. My daughter said, "Brett," and then stopped. I sat there. I felt it running down past my ear, over my collar. I could smell the cumin. I could hear the television in the other room. I stood up. I folded my napkin. I put on my jacket. I walked outside, and I got in my car, and I sat there for a minute with the engine off. Then I took up my phone and called Ted. Ted Garfield has been my corporate attorney for 19 years. I've referred him more business than I can count. He picked up on the second ring. I told him what happened. Calmly. All of it. Then I told him what I wanted to. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Give me until Monday." Here is what most people didn't know about Brett. The commercial real estate firm where he worked, Meridian Property Group, had been a client of my freight company for the better part of 3 years. We handled their physical relocations, document logistics, office transfers across 3 Ohio cities. It was not a massive contract, but it was steady, and I had personally vouched for the relationship when it began. I called the account manager at Meridian on Friday morning. His name is Phil, and he's been in the industry long enough to know that when someone who brought you a contract calls personally, you listen. I told Phil that I was reassessing all of my vendor relationships and that I was going to be directing our logistics business elsewhere going forward. Phil asked if there was anything Meridian could do to keep the contract. I said no. I said I appreciated the years of work and that it wasn't a reflection of his team. I was just making changes. What I didn't say, what I didn't need to say, was that Meridian had been using Brett's division to manage the coordination on those contracts. That Brett had been, quietly and without my knowledge, taking partial credit with his managers for the continued business I'd been sending their way. That when the contract moved, the credit moved with it. By Tuesday of the following week, I learned through a mutual contact that Brett had been placed on a performance improvement plan. I didn't arrange that. I want to be clear. I pulled a contract that was mine to pull. What happened inside Meridian as a result was between Brett and his employer. Ted, meanwhile, had been doing some work of his own. I had, over the years, made several large transfers to Megan's account. Not loans, gifts given freely. But Ted found something. When they'd done their taxes the prior year, they had reported one of those transfers, the $60,000 for the down payment, as income to a trust structure Brett had set up. It was a filing that didn't quite hold up to scrutiny. Ted wrote a letter, not threatening, not aggressive, just precise, the kind of letter that makes a person realize they should consult their own attorney. I also called my financial advisor, a woman named Catherine, who has managed my accounts for a decade and a half, and I told her I wanted to update my estate documents. The existing will had been written when Megan was in college. It left the majority of my estate to her outright. I had Catherine and Ted restructure it. What Megan would eventually inherit would now pass through a trust with specific provisions, managed distributions, tied to conditions that ensured it would actually serve her, rather than subsidize someone else's lifestyle. It was not a punishment. It was a correction. I didn't tell Megan any of this, not yet. 3 weeks passed. I didn't call. I didn't reach out. I went to work, came home, sat on my back porch in the evenings with a cup of coffee. I had a neighbor named Eugene who'd retired 2 years earlier from 30 years in commercial insurance, and sometimes we'd sit out there together and not say much. That was a good month for not saying much. Megan called on a Saturday morning, 7 weeks after the dinner. She didn't apologize immediately. She started with logistics, something about wanting to talk things through, which is a phrase people use when they want to revisit a situation without quite admitting they were wrong. I listened. Then she got quiet, and she said, "I should have said something when he did that, Dad. I should have said something right then." I told her I appreciated that. She said, "He told me afterward it was a joke, that you could take it." I said, "I know." She said, "I don't think it was a joke." I said, "I know that too." There was a long pause on the line, the kind that has weight. She said, "He's on a pip at work. He thinks it's because of you." She wasn't accusing me. She was just saying it, laying it out to see what I'd do with it. I said, "I pulled a business contract that I was responsible for bringing in. That's all I can tell you." She didn't push it. She understood the geometry of it without needing the details. We talked for almost 2 hours that morning. About her mother, a little. About what she remembered from when she was small. About what she actually wanted her life to look like. She told me she'd been unhappy for longer than she'd admitted, even to herself. She said Brett's temper, the one she'd been making excuses for in small ways for 2 years, wasn't small anymore. She hadn't wanted to say so because she was afraid of what it meant. I told her that whatever she decided, I was her father, and that wouldn't change. I told her she was not on her own. Brett moved out 5 months later. The divorce was not simple, but it was, ultimately, finished. Megan kept the house. The trust structure Ted and Catherine had put in place protected her inheritance completely. Brett's attorneys found nothing to work with. Megan found out about the estate changes after the fact, and she didn't object to them. She told me she thought it was actually smart. That she'd been thinking herself that she didn't want any money of mine passing through a joint account he had access to. She got a job at a marketing agency in Cleveland. Started commuting at first, then rented an apartment closer to the office. She called me every Sunday. Sometimes she drove down to Akron, and we'd have dinner at the same diner Sandra and I used to go to, the one on West Market Street that still does the open-faced turkey sandwich with the real gravy. She told me once over that dinner that she was embarrassed. Not about the divorce, about the way she'd sat there that night, the way she'd looked away. I told her I'd already let it go. She said, "Dad, a man poured chili on your head." I said, "And I had a very good turkey sandwich 3 months later, so it evens out." She laughed. First real laugh I'd gotten from her in a long time. I've thought about what I could have done differently, honestly and carefully, the way you can only do when the situation is finished and you're not angry anymore. I could have set clearer expectations earlier, not about money, but about what it means to be a family. I gave too much too freely and let it become the expectation instead of the gesture. That part is on me, but here's what I know. The night I walked out of that house and made a phone call instead of losing my temper, I did the right thing. Not because it was clever, because it was measured, because I didn't take something from him that wasn't mine to take. I only removed what I had given. There's a difference. It matters. My daughter knows the difference now too. I can hear it in the way she talks about what she wants going forward. Careful, clear-eyed, unentitled. She sounds like a woman who's learned to stand on ground she earned herself. Her mother would have recognized that. She would have been proud. I know I am. I've been sitting with this story for a while now. Not because it still hurts, but because I keep finding new things in it. Things I didn't see clearly when I was still inside it. What Brett did that night wasn't really about chili. And what I did afterward wasn't really about a contract. It was about something that had been building for years, quietly, the way pressure builds behind a wall you can't see. And by the time it shows, the structure is already compromised. I gave Megan everything I had, not just money, time, intention, the kind of steady presence you can only maintain by deciding to show up, even when it cost you. And I gave it freely, the way a parent is supposed to. But somewhere in the middle of all that giving, I forgot to ask the harder question. Not what does she need, but what am I teaching her about how the world works? Those are different questions. The first one is about love. The second one is about love. The second one is about wisdom. You need both. I thought I was providing both. I wasn't. Brett walked into a life where everything had already been arranged, a down payment waiting, a contractor on call, a father-in-law who absorbed problems before they became lessons. He didn't create that dynamic. I did. He just took advantage of it, the way water finds the lowest point. I don't say that to excuse him. What he did was cruel and deliberate. But I've made my peace with my own part in the architecture of it. Here's what I've come to understand about actions and their consequences. There is a weight to every choice that gets paid eventually, one way or another. Brett spent 2 years building a version of himself entitled dismissive, untouchable, that depended entirely on someone else's foundation. The moment I removed that foundation, there was nothing holding the structure up. He didn't fail because I punished him. He failed because he had never actually built anything himself. The performance improvement plan, the divorce proceedings, the legal documents that went nowhere, those weren't things I did to him. They were the natural result of a life constructed on borrowed credibility. Megan's path was different. When the support fell away, she found out what she was actually made of. She got a job. She found an apartment. She called every Sunday. That's not something I gave her, that was already in her. She just needed the conditions where it had to come out. I think about that sometimes. How much of what we call helping is actually preventing people from finding out who they are. I thought I was building security for my daughter. I was, in some ways, delaying her. That's a hard thing for a father to admit, but I am 63 years old and I'd rather be honest about it than comfortable. The night I walked out with chili drying on the collar of my jacket, I made a choice to respond with clarity instead of anger. Not because I'm a patient man by nature. Anyone who's run a business for 30 years will tell you patience is a learned skill, not a gift. But because I understood, somewhere in the parking lot with the engine off, that losing my temper would have been the most expensive thing I could have done. It would have made the story about me, about my reaction, about what I did wrong. Instead, I kept it about the truth, and the truth had plenty to say on its own. Megan sat across from me at that diner on West Market Street a few months later, laughing about a turkey sandwich, and I thought, this is what it was supposed to look like all along. Not me solving things for her, just the two of us, having dinner on level ground. That's the version of fatherhood I wish I'd understood sooner. Better late than never. I mean that.